Okay, we are just starting the webinar now, so welcome everyone. We can see people coming into the webinar and joining us, and welcome to today's Power Talk, where we're going to be talking about privacy and for Power Diary, and we're going to talk about exciting news in relation to Power Diary's security. So it's a really exciting topic for us to talk about today. We're sort of really happy to share this with you, and we will jump right in. So for those who have watched Power Talk before, my name is Damien Adler. I am one of the co-founders of Power Diary, and I head up also the customer success team. Prior, to Power Diary, and I guess part of the reason Power Diary started to begin with is that I'm a psychologist by trade, and a very long time ago now, my wife and I started a private practice, and we needed some software to run that. And long story short, Power Diary was born in partnership with my brother Paul, and we ended up growing that large over time, and part of the journey. With me today, co-hosting, is Paul. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Paul, to our.
So, thank you, Damien. Yeah, I'm the CTO of and Damien and the co-founder of Power Diary. I guess I sort of look at and manage our software development and our engineering teams, and think a lot about information security, and that's the topic of today. Before running Power Diary, which has been I don't know how many years now, but
12 or so years, I'd say.
I was just more than 10 or more than 10. I previously founded. I spent the 10 plus years before that running founding a successful technology company. And we did a lot of advisory and security information, and helping people with infrastructure and whatnot. Quite a long time, a couple of decades thinking about security, and excited to sort of talk to everyone today.
Yeah, and I think it's that's been a critical part of your career, really, going back to the start. So it's a new manifestation for last 12 or so years in Power Diary. Now, what we'll look at, and I'm just going to jump ahead to this next slide, is really kind of looking at security in private practice, and that's I guess a critical thing. And as a psychologist, I know that security and privacy is something that is a major concern. And I think from day one in training to become a psychologist or any health practitioner, they drill into the importance of confidentiality and keeping client information private and secure. And so, it's been something that, really, as we've developed Power Diary, it's sort of been something that has been a sort of top priority and, I guess, front of mind right from the sort of very start. But security is a sort of a funny thing, right? You never can sort of say that you've arrived. It's a constantly kind of moving target, because the way in which people attack systems and the way in which security systems can become vulnerable, it changes, over time. And so it's not something that you can ever kind of rest and say, okay, that's done. It's something that we've got to be vigilant about constantly. And it really, for us at Power Diary, I guess it's right from the start, from the very early conversations I think you and I had about the idea of starting Power Diary, that idea of how do we keep people's data safe has been sort of a foundational sort of building block, if you like, and it's been something that has always been kind of front of mind. But one of the difficulties, if you like, for practices is that we can do lots of things to kind of try and make software secure and try and do everything that we can. But from a practitioner's point of view, and when they're sort of selecting software, there is this kind of question about how do you know, like, if your software is truly secure. And that's something that we've thought about a lot, over the years. And we wanted to sort of be able to provide like the most sort of assurance and confidence that we could, that we the sorts of things that we do that people can be confident in, that choosing Powered to know that we take security seriously, and that they can have confidence in what we might be saying about security. And this sort of leads into the key kind of point that we're going to talk about today, and that is this very sort of exciting news that we are now ISO 27001, which is the information security standard. We are now certified, and this standard, which we'll dive into to sort of really talk about, what this is and why it matters. But in brief, it's sort of the best way to verify that the right sorts of systems and things are in place to keep data secure. And we're going to do a deep dive, but the headline here is that now, Powered is officially ISO 27001 certified, and that's current and active as we speak. So let's jump into a little bit more about really what this sort of means. And perhaps, Paul, you can kind of take us through this. Like, why does this, why should we care about this? And what exactly is it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, ISO 27001 is a information security standard that covers the protection of the data that a company has.
Right.
In our case, this is Powered. ISO, there's 150 plus internet. It covers sort of 150 plus national standard bodies around the world. So it's not just a one country framework. It's European, it's UK, Australia, US. All the main markets that Powered covers. ISO 27001 is something relevant and covers all of the data that we're storing, and that we have adequate protections in place. And we'll go into them a little bit further, but it's quite an exhaustive program that covers protecting your data.
Yeah, and so the ISO organization itself, so this international organization standardization, so their sort of main reason for existence, right, is to look at things that are important around the world that should be really kind of standardized, and there should be this sort of high level agreement about how things should be done to achieve various outcomes. Now, for ISO 27001, this is really around like the sort of the best thinking and the best sort of the highest standards of how you would manage, and how you should manage data security. What level of standard you need to meet to be able to say, okay, we are managing this securely. And so they sort of set that standard, and then essentially to become accredited or certified in this, then that involves being able to sort of demonstrate purity, right? So we think about the thing that kind of comes to mind, right? So, and I think this is one of the things that's so different about, right, is that I kind of think of intuitively before be involved in Powder. I think maybe encryption, be encrypted, and there should be maybe two-factor, maybe a firewall, right? And that might stop people sort of attacking the system and like being able to intrude on the system. And maybe like two-factor authentication. I think you think of, well, if someone's logging in, there should be a second way of verifying that person, right? So that's sort of like what comes to mind. But when looking at this ISO 27001, it sort of goes well beyond this, right? Like this is not just focused on those few things, which are relevant, of course, but it's a more extensive sort of assessment of your security standing. Is that the right way to think about it?
I think so, absolutely. Yeah. And it's a very comprehensive program covering. And if we were to on the right hand side of the slide here, you can see the different areas that this ISO 27001 framework sort of covers, and covers specifically with information security. So some of that stuff isn't perhaps, as you mentioned before, Damien, as obvious. But if you look at the recent breaches and things like that, it's almost never the firewall or the encryption that was sort of at exploited here. It was some of these other points around the people and the policies that you've got in place, and that led to ultimately the data was exploited in the recent sort of hacking attacks.
Yeah, and that's sort of where the biggest vulnerabilities seem to open up are really the areas that people are often not thinking about. That idea of what your human resources processes are, looking at what vendors you use, like in our case, like what do we use in Powered RA if we're using third parties, to provide certain functions, so our data centers and so forth. What about their security? And I think this is where ISO is really is such a distinct thing, is that it requires you you can't just sort of make some comments about the popular things that people kind of think about.
Like encryption at rest, everyone asks about that.
Yeah,
of course we have it, but that's not how, if you look back at all the major security sort of incidents, it wasn't that yes, you do need to have that, but it's these other things.
Yeah, and I think this is when we see people asking us questions, they're looking at joining up with Powered RA and they've got security questions. What comes to mind, isn't the things that actually make the biggest difference. It's this stuff here, and the going through the kind of the ISO 27001 formal certification process means that essentially we've had to demonstrate our kind of compliance in each of these areas that relate to security, and that's something that is really sets things apart from if you just sort of think, well, we do the basics, or we do the obvious kinds of things. There's sort of very few companies, right, that have actually achieved this, the certification in this regard. In your view, why do you think that is? That there's not a lot of practice management systems out there that are sort of that have gone through this ISO certification process.
I think it's probably one of the, if we were to look at the list that was just previously on that slide there, but it does cover, there's a lot of sort of fundamental basic sort of questions that people do, areas that people that are important, encryption, etc. But there's quite a lot of others, and in fact, some of those sort of hardcore, IT stuff that is only a relatively minor part of it, and it's quite complicated to demonstrate to an auditor, which is what you have to do to become ISO 27001 certified. You have to demonstrate, you have to do the thing, and you have to demonstrate that you are doing it. And both those things, all of that is not, it's not straightforward. To do that, it does take a fair bit of work. And I mean, we have a dedicated privacy person who's been with us, team member who's been with us for over it must be a couple of years now. And we also have a separate dedicated person who just works on security, doesn't implement anything, doesn't audit anything, just works on the security programs and awareness and understanding at Powered RA.
And I think it's a process too that a lot of it is unseen. So when you're looking at focusing resources on things, like for us, we sort of really feel that this level of accountability and that kind of having external independent assessment of our security is so important. But I think for a lot of other companies too, it's not something that day to day, week to week, you can kind of highlight as here's a new feature or here's sort of something. And it's easy to kind of get focused on the things that are just that front facing, that are fun to sort of announce, but there's a lot of work and effort that goes in behind the scenes. But we think this is one of those sort of foundational things that we should sort of get right. And I think for what we're looking at here, that the security, like it needs to kind of be done in a way that I guess nothing sort of can escape our attention. And I think this is one of the sorts of things that, when you're sort of thinking about what's front of mind for security, it's very easy to miss things. And it's that kind of, you don't know what you don't know, right? And that's sort of like the biggest risk.
Yeah.
If you're not an expert and you're not, and that's sort of where that false sense of security can sort of come from, because you could be sort of focusing lots of attention on the things that you might in good faith believe are the most, that are relevant to security, and kind of external one set of standards that have got the best minds in the world thinking about that. And then two, have those standards objectively applied and assessed in terms of how you're implementing it. It's very easy to kind of be like, have a blind spot, and just not, you might make a lot of genuinely positive comments about your security on your website, for instance, but not mention 5 or 6 or 7 crucial things that no one thinks to ask, and that internally are not being not being assessed and not being asked, and that's where the threats sort of typically tend to come from.
And I mean, like, just the fact of us two sitting here talking today, security it's really important. We think it's really important. It is important to Powered RE, and you've got both of us here today talking about it. And it's something that we have been working on together with that security team and privacy team, and then also myself up the line with the more sort of like technical engineering type people, actually implementing and doing this stuff. That sort of it's a really big priority at Powered RE, and protecting people's data and information and making sure it's kept private.
Yeah, I think if we were looking at say all the things that you and I might meet about over the last couple of years, if we were to put it into it, we were going to graph it on the topic, right? Of security and privacy. It's just that every single week we have got at least one, sometimes multiple meetings that on these topics, and looking at our compliance, looking at the various certification frameworks that we look at, and of course ISO, because it's really about it's not just about the practice of what you're doing, but it's also being able to demonstrate that through sort of systematic collection of evidence to be able to kind of to show it. So
and Damien, I mean, vulnerabilities and what it means to be secure is it's not sort of something that you can sort of say, right, one and done, right, it's done, right, and draw a line under that, move on to set other things. Programs like ISO 27001 require regular, it's mandated, and regular review and assessment, and regular external audits. Like externally, it must be audited every 12 months. What you're doing.
And in that, they look at our collection of evidence. So you can't have a focused effort in the last month before an audit and to try and pass it, because part of that, the system is looking at your adherence to all the requirements over that 12 months and the collection of evidence over that preceding period of time to demonstrate that you've been attending to all the things that are important. And again, this is the difference between having an objective external standard like this versus just an in-house, maybe well-intentioned focus on security, but without the structure there and without that kind of external assessment, it's so easy for things to kind of just to go missing or to be forgotten and just drop off. And it's so having something like this is makes such a difference. Now, okay, so to get to this, it's not exactly a straight road, right? It's not something you can decide. Hey, this would be a good idea to get our security certification. It's not a sort of thing you can do in a couple of weeks. So can you kind of walk us through the road that Harry's been on to get there. Yeah.
And I might go straight to the third point, the compliance system that we implemented probably 2+ years ago, and it was initially implemented, for privacy. So it covers privacy and our data security, and it was initially implemented for, well, GDPR was a sort of key focus of that, but with a good understanding that this system will help us capture and show compliance with a variety of security programs and privacy programs, and that certainly it's been extremely helpful in monitoring that you're doing it, as well as then showing an auditor that you providing evidence that you are actually doing it. So that's very helpful at a management and a compliance sort of at an evidence level.
It also gives us in that system a sort of a live or a current sort of feed of what the current regulations are, and it breaks them down, right? So each line of each regulation, each requirement, what's required to achieve that, what that looks like from a policy point of view or other elements.
And it's updated.
Right, exactly. So and again, it's a difference between having something that is a folder in someone's Google Drive or something printed out collecting dust that was relevant for a particular snapshot in time.
Yes.
But this sort of system that we utilize really keeps everything kind of up to date, and it sort of alerts us. So it's sort of another form of external information coming in to say, hey, there's been a change to this regulation in this particular context, or ISO 27001 change in evidence requirement, or maybe a change in the standard. We get a direct feed of that, and we know immediately, what needs to be done and how we need to modify what we do to ensure continued compliance.
Yeah. So every month, every quarter, annually, there's new evidence is collected in there, rather than as you said, just sitting in a folder somewhere. And maybe a mad scramble before an audit, perhaps is done, maybe. But this we don't do that. We have everything inside a dedicated compliance management system, which where it helps us efficiently and effectively keep on top of data security, information security, like what the ISO 27001 is covering. And as you mentioned before, it's such a range of different areas of the business and different areas that are really important to information security. And those issues, those areas are not that sexy, or they're not that top of mind, but they're really important, and they don't, they're an important part, full stop, of keeping information secure, and they're an important part of the standard.
And to get sort of from where we were, and I think we've always, very fair to say, we've always had a sort of genuinely strong focus on security and on privacy, but there's a difference between that and then being able to evidence in this way. So that the journey there, so we got the program in place, that sort of helps us kind of keep on track of that. You mentioned before we hired some dedicated specialists, right? Yeah. To both in the privacy space and in the sort of security space, and then we systematically, to get this, to get our certification over the past 12 months or longer. We sort of go through each area of the system and each area of what we're doing, and making sure that we've got the right things set up. And this sort of includes things like team training, making sure that the training that we provide is matched to each of the roles that people have and the level of access they might have, and so forth, that they're aware of and it's not just a matter of just making up training. The training itself has to be achieve certain standards under the ISO framework. So it gets down to that level of detail. And I think we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've got about 150 or so controls that are actively monitored,
Yeah.
right, under the ISO 27001 standard, that 150 different points that we are actively monitoring and collecting evidence of that on to sort of show that compliance. So this sort of I think it goes part of the way to explain why it's not something that you see many organizations having, is that it is even when you've already got a good culture around security and privacy, this level of oversight and assessment is a whole different level.
Yeah, and you're addressing important questions that an auditor who is a security expert is asking, and you need to not just say that you're doing it, but actually let's provide some evidence, a screenshot. Like, how do you provide evidence? It's screenshots. It's actually real-time showing of information that you need to do to say, show me that you have done a disaster recovery test and a simulation. So let's, and you're required to do it and show me that you've done it and what you've found, how you're going to improve, not just were you able to do it, actually, like, what are your sort of measures in place to improve it?
Yeah.
And to do better next time. And so, so we've had to do, disaster recovery and make sure that, data can be restored from a backup and that it's regularly tested. But we have good backup systems in place, and we test every single day. We have an automated process, but we have to do a special one that to demonstrate for compliance with this system with ISO 27001. Like a full disaster recovery has been simulated, and actually you have got the data back. And what did you get back, and how long did you get it back, and how can you do it better next time?
Yeah, and then that sort of helps sort of ensure that and the security part of the requirement is around availability, and preservation of data in an adverse event, and that sort of you have to do these exercises. They're essentially like fire drills, right? To show and demonstrate what you learned from that as you go through. And then in the interview process, as part of the certification in itself is quite an intensive kind of thing that we kind of went through, right? That the level of assessment is, it's impressive. It's somewhat intimidating in a way when you're like the interviews and whatnot we did, but where you'd be facing a panel who are firing questions at us for hours, right? And that's just one small part of the assessment. But things like, okay, they would pick random vendors that we might use. So let's say how we might manage our SMS process or manage something, and then they'd say, okay, email, exactly. And then they show us your assessment of those vendors. How did you assess them? How have you done a risk assessment? Where do you, how have you considered the various elements of choosing vendors to provide services, so that it's not enough just to say that what we do in-house is acceptable and up to the standard, but we also need to demonstrate that each vendor that we might choose that is part of the ecosystem of Powered RE meets the right standards as well. And we documented
and understood, and rigorous selection process has been done.
Yeah, and reviewed. I think when we went through this, there wasn't a single. There's not a single area of Powered RE that is not required under ISO to manage things in certain ways. So even our marketing department and so forth, there are requirements about how data is managed if someone signs up for a trial. Like every element of the operation, which is great. It was certainly interesting being interviewed over long periods. Like I think we had one was a 6 hour, was it, the interview that we with a panel?
Yeah. And it involves lots of people. Like for example, like really important person is our HR manager, to make sure that to answer questions around our staff training and and that it's those sort of things. It's not encryption at rest, for example. It's those sort of things that a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of exploits and data has been hacked. Not to Powdari, but to if you look at across all of the different big events that have happened, big security incidents that have happened around the world, they've come from.
It's typically those sort of things that aren't as sexy, aren't as front of mind, and it's like, exactly. And this process sort of forces people to think about it, and we don't get our accreditation unless we can demonstrate every one of those things that doesn't necessarily jump out at you is attended to, and we can prove it.
Yeah.
So in terms of the impact for a practice, and what it kind of means, and I think this is something that at the end of the day, what our role is to sort of make running practices easier, and provide functions and features that sort of make the life of practitioners and health administrators as well just easier and simpler, right?
Yeah.
And so for a practice, I think the key thing is that by using, say in our case, Powdari, that's ISO 27001 certified, it means that it's very easy to establish the level of security that Powdari is utilizing. So you can have that kind of confidence that you're meeting the standards, meeting those professional obligations, meeting the regulatory compliance around security, and that very serious obligation that practitioners have about protecting the privacy and security of the sensitive information that they get. What it means is about to say, okay, I'm using Powdari. Powdari has gone through this very thorough, objective process that is measured and is set up based on external standards. So it's not sort of a reliance on saying, well, I think Damien and Paul seem like pretty good sort of people. I'm sure they're doing the right thing. It actually takes it beyond that, and sort of, it means that as a practice, you can kind of sleep easy at night knowing that that you've chosen software that has gone through that kind of process. And that kind of means too that, if you're talking to patients about it, you can kind of have confidence, in what you're saying, and be able to say, well, this is, we've chosen a platform that has gone through this process where we're sort of taking care in how, as a practice, we're choosing the vendors, the people are looking after your information, they're storing it and managing it for us. We're choosing an organization that has got this objective assessment in place, not as a one-off, but as an ongoing way in which they kind of do business. And we really, when we were looking at our approach to this, and it's the reason we prioritized ISO 27001 straight up as the first, major framework to kind of go through a formal accreditation process, is because we think it's the hardest, and it involves all the things that you'd think of, but all those other things that we've mentioned as well. But then it means that practitioners can have confidence in where their data is being stored and how that's been stored. So it means you don't need to be a security expert at trying to choose.
But it's moving target.
Yeah, to a moving target that's already a specialist area, right?
Yeah.
Like it's something that for health practitioners we know, right? It's not the area of specialty. It's their area of specialty is providing great healthcare to patients. And so this sort of, it takes that. But
as you said before, you don't have to take our word for it.
Yeah.
Like we have done good stuff, right? But there are experts, and their job is just to do the auditing.
Yeah, that's right. And their to even become an auditor is quite a process. So their reputation, is on the line too. That when they don't give out the auditors don't give out the certifications lightly, because if they were found to have not fully assessed, then they would actually lose their ability and their standing as an auditor. The other real benefit too is around this kind of reassurance for clients, because I think, every time you turn on the news or, you see these kind of headlines around data breaches that occur, security incidents that occur. And that's anxiety provoking, we know, certainly, for practitioners and practice owners, but also for patients, right? That to think, well, I see a health practitioner. They're putting their data in the computer, I know, but I don't know what that is, and where it is and how reliable, how secure it is. So this idea, it allows you to have, confident communication with your patients about that. And we're going to also provide some pre-written explanations that you can use about what ISO 27001 is, what it really means in terms of the security of the health data that's being stored, and also some security badges that actually link through to our website, where we'll have information about the security of Power Diary. And by having those security badges that people are able, if they use Power Diary, are able to put on their website and perhaps in their email, signature and so forth, to say, okay, we've chosen software, we're thinking about this, we've chosen software that adheres to these objective international standards. And that's another way of just showing that this is something that kind of you're thinking about, and something that you're attending to. And again, it gives that confidence to clients, whether they're current or new ones who are looking at perhaps seeking services from your practice, and they're choosing between your practice and someone else's. When you're able to demonstrate that this is something you're actively thinking about and taking good care of, then that's a huge benefit for practices, and something that we're really has been part of the driving force, is that answer that question about how do you know if your system is that you've chosen is genuinely secure. And
it's a good point, Dave. Like, you can never be absolutely perfectly confident that you're secure. But for example, I guess you've got to be the awareness is sort of is a very important component of it. And so, for example, like, we have regular externally conducted, specialist people or specialist companies who white hat ethical hackers that attempt to hack into Power Diary, and they and they provide a written formal report, and it's part of it, doing so programs such as ISO 27001, and that's something that's conducted every single year, and it's an important part of our security stance. And it's again you as a practitioner, you just can't do that. And you could do it, I suppose, but you're very unlikely to be qualified and experienced and up to date with the latest security vulnerabilities to conduct that test properly.
Yeah, that's right. And they use, like, when this is a term called like penetration testing as part of this process that we're talking about. And those companies that we hire, these external companies, I mean, they will throw everything at it, right? They'll use the latest hacking tools and things that are out there to say, okay, we're going to to see if we can get around any of this sort of.
Can we get any information that we otherwise are not able to, shouldn't be able, that we shouldn't be able to get to. That's one thing which they've never been able to ever. And the other thing is, like, can we, or do you have anything that's perhaps not optimally configured? Yeah. And they provide us with information about things, and the severity and whatnot, but which we make sure that we mitigate if that's ever just the potential of a misconfiguration. We make sure that we keep on top of it.
Yeah, and I think that was the other point to make too, is that in going through this process, that we did find, not necessarily with the penetration testing, but just going through the overall ISO 27001 the program and getting ready and taking that sort of systematic approach. There were things that we found that we needed to improve on, like, and they weren't major things that would provide like from a technical point of view provide any kind of immediate, but there are things that we needed to kind of like tighten up on, or an element of training that we had that we realized maybe the emphasis wasn't, well, we weren't covering all the points that we needed to in our induction training when we're looking at privacy and security. And so, going through that, even with all the work we've done over however many years it is now, but there are, even with that, there are things that you identify that you think, okay, we now know that we've attended to those things, and we continually kind of monitor and revisit, and always look to kind of improve. So even when you come into it in a pretty good, in a great mindset, and you've had a good culture of that, the process itself reveals the things that, again, you may not ever have thought of, and therefore that's where those vulnerabilities lie. And so it's good to be able to have that it's that level of confidence that, okay, it's a systematic process that has occurred. So let's have a look at the this is sort of not just an isolation when we're sort of talking about ISO 27001. It's obviously our focus today because it's a certification that we have been working on and now have achieved. But I just want to make the point about that we operate across a whole range of different countries, but our primary sort of markets, we look at Australia and New Zealand, of course, is where we originally started, but now we have operations in UK and North America, US, Canada, right? And so what that means is that we fall under lots of regulatory regimes and lots of standards. And what that really does is that it means that we apply the kind of most restrictive, the toughest standard and management of data that exists anywhere in the world. So if we were looking at, for instance, let's say a particular requirement about how type of encryption or type of security level, we would look at if there is a requirement to meet a certain standard. We'd look at the toughest requirement, right, that might exist, and we apply that. So that by applying the sort of toughest and meeting the toughest standard, then across all the other areas that we operate in, we automatically exceed the requirement for all those other areas. And it really, by having this kind of global approach, sort of makes Power a lot stronger. Now, one of the things that we are doing when we kind of look at privacy and security is not just looking at this verification and the certification now of ISO, the 27001, but we're also looking and in the process of having independent verification of these other programs as well. So that it's not just that if we look at GDPR and some of the HIPAA and US, we're in process now, so that there's independent, again, assessment and auditing of those as well, so that it's sort of that idea of confidence can be across each of the key areas that we operate under. So this is the beginning of this phase of our journey in this space.
Yeah, I wanted to just quickly touch on. I think there's only a couple of slides left, but just to quickly touch on sort of using software, and this does it securely, and this does apply to PowerDiary, but it also applies to pretty much everything you use, every piece of software. So. And I didn't want to, it's something we've talked about before. There's nothing new on here at all. So I won't sort of dwell on the actual, how to do it and whatnot. But it's very important. And security, information security, it's a sort of collaborative affair, and it's just as important that systems are maintained properly and kept up to date, and people who are working at it, at the systems, the engineers that are building it and supporting it, that everyone's got the right training and there's the right policies and procedures and processes in place. And then also, the practitioner sitting in front of the computer, that you are using, that you're also sort of, upholding the thing, you're also performing an important part of the role, very important part of the role. And it's important that, security is maintained there.
Yeah.
So some of the things I think, like in practices, something that's super important is to have a password on your screensaver. That's just like so simple, and needs to be done. And a screensaver that can't. So if you walk away, you go to a busy practice or something, you go away to the go to the toilet or something, or make a coffee. That it's a bit annoying, but that a screensaver comes on quickly, and that you can't have a patient or someone in the waiting room quickly look at any information,
or even steal the device and be able to access. If someone was to take off with that device, because that does happen where people will leave computers unattended and logged in.
And I think two-factor authentication is annoying. Like it's annoying, but it's super effective. And hopefully we'll figure out ways to make it less annoying, or the market will as well, perhaps. But it just means that someone can't just sort of take your password and then sort of log in easily. And that's so using something else that a secure key or some like a mobile phone with a key and whatnot, as a two-factor authentication, that is ultra helpful. And obviously, unique user accounts don't share passwords at all across across different systems. Especially, please don't share passwords. The password you use for Power Diary, only use that ever for Power Diary. And we have absolutely no way of accessing or knowing the password that you have stored in Power Diary, or there is no known way of no computer way, no known way of uncovering all that information or what you have as your password, but please keep it unique.
And the reason behind that, I think sometimes people are not aware that, let's say you use the same password across multiple systems, right? And one of those systems doesn't store their, the passwords in a secure way, or you get sort of tricked into revealing that password. So, you get send something that looks like a
Facebook, and it's something else. It's actually not.
Exactly. Now, if you use that same password across lots of different systems, then now that means that the hackers can take that data and what they know of you, and then just try those credentials that across lots and lots of different systems, right? And then if you're using the same password and you don't have two-factor authentication, that means that they get a key to your life, right? Because that one key, it's the master key that fits all locks in your life, right? And that's the way to kind of think about it. So that idea of always use a unique, that's a very, very good reason. It's so that if you get tricked into putting something into Facebook that isn't really Facebook, you click on a link the friend sends you, and you click in. That's okay. You might lose. They might get access to Facebook, but they're not going to get access to anything else in your life. And again, this is where we see these sort of vulnerabilities. And I think this sort of point around using software securely, it's a little bit like, we can do all the things that we possibly can. We're always thinking about to try and make Power Diary, as safe and secure as possible. And that's kind of like having, the world's best locksmith come to your house and put on the best locks and the most advanced security system, right, on your house. But if you leave the windows open, right, and you don't do the kind of basic things that are on, that you need to do to make use of that, then it may as well all be for nothing, right? Because there is a glaring vulnerability that is about the behavior, about how you're utilizing a system. So these things, as you were saying, Paul, I think that collaborative approach is so important, and that we can do everything that we possibly can, to be up to date and make sure that we're managing and providing the best security we possibly can. But it's so important, right, that you utilize it in a way that is effective. And then moving on to that kind of in a broader kind of way, when you're looking at overall, I just want to put in this is our last slide before we will finish up, but just some security tips for managing your practice more generally. So we talked a little bit about systems and whatnot, but physical records, making sure that you minimize the creation of physical records. When you create paper records, you've got to be able to deal with them and shred them, and it creates a whole kind of security scenario that you need to kind of manage. Making sure that from an environment point of view, so in your practice, that if you've got devices that can be removed, that there's locks securing them, and you can go to your local office supplies or computer store, and you can buy locks that will secure laptops and so forth to desks quite effectively. Make sure that any local networks that you've got that you're using are password protected, and that you don't have ports like internet ports available for people to plug in. Sometimes people have reconfigured their office and they will leave data points that are available in the waiting room that might if someone plugs into that, give them access to their internal networks. Like now it wouldn't affect PowerDiary because PowerDiary is hosted securely in the cloud, but we know like sometimes practices will have old on-premises file management systems and a shared server or something that they're still using from before they were moved to PowerDiary or something. And if you've got an open internet access or open port, and then someone can plug into that and access. So just make sure that you kind of have a look environmentally and make sure there's nothing that's kind of obvious there. And then finally, people, and we know that actually people are the main vulnerability when it comes to security. So making sure that you've got security policies and procedures in place.
We help people with that.
We do. We have a whole feature, the operations manual in PowerDiary that you can use. If you're not using it already, it's there. You can activate it. And we have policies and procedures to get you started. You can go in there and select the need and edit them to your. But make sure that you have those and that your people are aware of them. That when people start working at your practice, that they they get oriented, they go through and they read those, understand them, and so forth. So because that's the biggest sort of vulnerability typically when something has gone wrong. It's because people just either not being aware or not placing enough emphasis. So anyway, we'll send this through. I won't go through all the dot points, but we'll actually send this through to a follow-up to those attending today. So you'll have this slide, you'll have these sort of key points there. But we just wanted to sort of touch on that to think outside of, that it's great that PowerDiary has got this sort of verified, externally verified security certification now, but also don't forget these simple things about how you use any software and, what you do in your own, your own practice as well. Anything else, Paul, you wanted to add before we wrap it up?
Nothing else, but best of luck, and it's I think it's something that people, just as you and I are sitting here, today, I think everyone, business owners and practice owners should take it seriously, like we do, and it's a moving target, and it's something that people need to sort of open their eyes up to and think. And I suppose by attending this seminar, that's the perhaps the start, or it's a key part of the journey, and raising awareness and people. It's
one of those things too, I think, with security that we've often, you and I have often talked about, that you can't wait for there to be something go wrong. Like you can never, you can't wait. If you've got to practice, wait until something goes wrong to then take action, because that's it's one of those horses bolted, shutting the gate after the horse is bolted, and it sort of in some ways goes against human nature to be sort of thinking and prioritizing things that aren't sort of immediately in front of you, but it's because of that it's so important, that you sort of prioritize.
Security isn't just about encryption at rest and firewalls or other sort of IT stuff. It's people.
It's it's people, and it's the systems that you use, practice management systems and everything else that you use in your ecosystem of running your practice that ultimately is what makes a difference. So look, for us, we're really, I guess, excited, and I think proud to be able to deliver this sort of this sort of peace of mind, and I think this sort of external verification that you don't, it's not you don't need to. It's not about what you think of us, about whether we're well-intentioned or whether it takes it, that outside of that, it makes it something that you can externally, objectively point to and look at and say, okay, I can tick that, off on my mind that this has been assessed, and it's not, down to your individual expertise trying to assess different companies. Hopefully we've made that easier and given you peace of mind. Look, if there's anything we can help you with, our support team is there. You have any questions, follow up, email, whatever you like, email, chat, knowledge base, website, lots of different ways. Or if you want to organize a Zoom call with one of our team members and go through and help you configure your account or look at your user settings to improve the security of how you're operating, let us know. Team's happy to help in any way that we can. So we will leave it there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Good fun being able to present this and let people know what we've been working on all this time.